What's going down Nearbound? No, I have no idea. I don't know what to do with this,
I
Isaac.
like it. I love it. Jared, we made this decision, I think maybe 6 weeks ago, a couple months ago, that Partner Hacker was going to become Nearbound.com. And that was a big enough thing in and of itself. But then there was this separate question. Do we keep the PartnerUp podcast, And you were like, either way, Isaac, I'm going to go with it. And I waffled back and forth so many times and finally was like, you know what? We're staking our claim. This is the Nearbound podcast from here on out. And it's essentially what you've come to know and love with PartnerUp, with maybe just like a little bit of an expanded purview of some of the conversations we can have and some of the people that we can get their ears to perk up, because the word partner is not front and center and it doesn't scream, oh, that's for partner people, not for me. It kind of expands who we can influence is sort of the idea. So here we are, really the first episode of the Nearbound podcast, but a continuation of the PartnerUp podcast.
You know what I love about this, guys, is it really expands the audience, to your point, because I think about it a little bit like my good old friend, Lars Nilsson, who is really the godfather of modern sales development, many would say. And he, I think, in his group coined the phrase ABX, account-based anything, which really became a recognition of it's an all-encompassing, all-inclusive, revenue-focused effort. And to me, Nearbound speaks more to that. And it's the truth. So well done.
Yeah, well, he's hopped in right here, folks, but he's no stranger to me or to the kind of like Partner Hacker, and now, as Isaac said, the Nearbound.com kind of world. And I'm posting a video, so it'll be on my LinkedIn if you haven't seen it yet. It's actually like a 10-minute video of me just thanking everyone. So that includes you, Isaac, the team, the community, the listeners, Matt, people like you, for the wild run that was Partner Hacker. I'm not sure that there's ever been a media brand, in B2B, in our kind of niche, kind of tech space, that kind of had the aspirations, the gall, the guts, the stupidity to try and pull off what we did in sparking a movement, and then really trying to define and shape not just what I call a category, but really an industry around Nearbound, and that the partnerships profession is centered right in the middle of this conversation for taking that mainstream to marketing, sales, success. So Nearbound.com's live. And before the show, I was like, Matt's perfect for this. So everybody who's listening in and not watching, we got Matt Cameron of SaaSy Sales, and just a legend from SaaS. And Matt was actually my first sales mentor. So I credit probably.
Wait a second.
What? Did I just hop over that too fast?
It just sunk in all of a sudden. Matt, I have been on sales calls with Jared, and he does things that you're not supposed to be able to do and pulls off things that his ability as a salesperson is dangerous. I'll put it that way. He's very dangerous. Do I have you to thank for that? Or should I thank you for the fact that he is even at all bridled in some way? Like, was he even more uncontained and uncontrollable before you got a hold of him?
I don't know if I can comment on either one of those, except to say that, Jared's as good as he is because he's incredibly good at taking input and contribution from many, many sources, synthesizing it, making his own. And, I don't mind telling him now in front of your thousands of audience users, I can tell you right now that if not already, Jared will be a far better salesperson than myself. And I've done okay. And it's because he's so good at that. So there you go. I'm quite happy to step back and let his star shine. And for the people on the podcast, they can't hear this. What are you holding up there, Jared?
Yeah, so this is the SaaSy Sales Impact Award, right? So I saw you give out the first one ever. This is like the coolest thing I've ever gotten in my life. And then it says self-made on it. So it's a figure that is carving himself out of stone. It's so cool. So Matt was kind enough from a sales leadership perspective to recognize me as someone that made an impact on the sales landscape last year. So for 2022 with kind of bringing partnerships to the forefront of the conversation. So TLDR, Isaac, yeah, we got, there's a lot of history there. And I learned a lot from Matt on how to build, revenue orgs and teams. And in fact, actually one piece of lore that's worth calling out, I actually will give Matt as much credit as to anyone to me going on this journey, because the very first guest was actually Bobby Napoltonia. Right, on PartnerUp, right? And there's an entire chapter in the Partner Hacker Handbook about me going to San Francisco with Bobby Napoltonia. Right, Matt? And I remember when you made that introduction for me.
Yep, and that's what it's all about. I think it really speaks to the nearbound ethos and the way this
Right.
thing works, and that is basically everything happens through people and their connections. And Bobby, for those who don't know, was an OG Salesforce person who's responsible for a lot of the channel revenue that comes through. He really was fundamental in building the pillars of that organization. And when Jared said, "Hey, I'm embarking on this new journey," and that was actually when you were with Drift. And it
Right.
was the first time you'd had a dedicated role. I said, well, do you know what? You've got to spend time with this fellow, Bobby Napletoni, who's an incredibly thoughtful and importantly, generous person who I'm really glad has made an impact along the way. So that's what it's all about, isn't it?
I think that's the shift, Matt. And I think you're a great person to bring alongside this because you've had some amazing runs and you've seen both sides. You've seen hyper growth to whoops, there's not much there. You've seen, hyper growth to $1 billion exits. You've been a part of Salesforce. So Yammer, Salesforce. I've certainly seen you in action training dozens and dozens of sellers and even partnerships professionals at SaaSy Sales. What feels so different to you about 2023 and enough for you to be, like an original backer of ours and friend and advocate coming from, let's say, what a lot of people would silo as just sales. I think you think much more strategically as a business operator. Um, why is this moment from your point of view something that is happening? I mean, I don't feel crazy calling it a moment now. Like it's certainly here. It doesn't mean that we've won. There's tons to do. But what's different from your point of view, Matt?
Well, there's two comments I'll make to start off with to set the table, and that is one is this moment's taken a lot longer than I expected for it to happen and get broad acceptance. I'm one of these people that I see the end of times in certain ways of doing business well before they happen, which means frankly, I often miss out well, because the wave's still going, but it's going to end. It's going to end. And this one, I've seen the sort of the direct sales, the outbound predictive revenue type motion. I've been seeing it dying for years. It's finally there. It's not dead, but the old way of doing things is certainly on its last gasp. And then the second thing is for everybody listening, you are at the forefront, at the cusp of this next thing. So the fact that you're listening to this podcast and taking these learnings means that you're going to be many, many steps ahead of the others behind you, because this will take quite a while from my perspective to catch on broadly, right? And that means there's this wonderful window of opportunity for people who are starting to get it, to execute on it, and get miles and miles ahead. So why do I think it's happening now? Because as technologists, we're responsible for basically poisoning the well with respect to our outreach to others, building a sense of a lack of trust. I used to joke when I was a kid, I used to work in New Zealand, which had a population of 5 million people. And, 15, 20 years ago, I could get a meeting with any CEO, any CEO. Why? Because the country's so small that if you wasted somebody's time or were a bad actor, you'd never get in the door of any company again. So there's this sort of implied trust. Now, in larger economies, of course, that was never true, right? And now it turns out it's not true in New Zealand either in these tiny companies, because we've created these machine gun automation systems that mean that every day we get bombarded with messaging that includes, frankly speaking, as due to the success of Inbound and what the wonderful work that HubSpot did, there's even spam content marketing now that means that we're trying to put filters on our search results and because we can't find good content because there's all this nonsense being created by SEO driven people. So this is why I think we're at the place we're at now.
It's interesting. So at the early phases of a shift like this, where now I would say we've talked about before, Jared, people are like problem aware, still solution wary, trying to figure out what the solutions are, but problem aware. Okay, we have problems with these existing go-to-market motions, these tactics that were working for, a while. They're sort of getting weaker and weaker. Yes, we get it. There's something here, this Nearbound idea, surrounding buyers, tapping into people they trust. Great. And then the next move is often like a structural or operational or technological, like, okay, let's get the ops team to set up the process and and what's often missing is what's demanded with a change like this. What is demanded of each of us individually as humans? And I'll never forget, after I founded a bootstrap services based company and was running that for 5 years and had some success. And then I raised venture to go create a platform, a tech platform. And so I'd never run a venture-backed software platform. And I remember I talked with somebody who had, and who had, had a similar process from me from a services bootstrap company. And he's like, you got to read this book. What got you here won't get you there. And I actually didn't even finish the book. It was one of those books with most business books. Between the title and like the first handful of chapters, you're like, oh, like I get, like it really just that concept of I actually have to become a different person in order for this to work. That's something that's often lost. And when we got on this call, Matt, it was really interesting. You were talking about revenue EQ, this concept of like your emotional intelligence as a seller, as a revenue leader. And that's such a great sort of marriage of what we're seeing in this world of of companies recognizing the need to bring this new go-to-market motion into play, to layer on Nearbound, to tap into people buyers' trust. Okay, how do you do that? Great, here's the plays. We got the blueprint, we got the playbook, implement them, but that's not enough. The people implementing those actually have to level up a little bit too. They have to change. They have to develop a different type of empathy and emotional intelligence than what was required for outbound and inbound. So I'd love for you to dive into like, where did that come out of, this EQ idea? And like, where is that now? Where are you seeing the most success? And what would you, I don't know, what are you advising revenue leaders to do to implement that? Because that's a lot harder to say, hey, you got to do a new strategy. That's one thing. Everybody that works on your team, they also have to change a little bit as people. That's a bigger ask.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so it really first came up for me way back in 1996 when I read Daniel Goleman's book, which did a great job of synthesizing what emotional intelligence was. And it just clicked to me that I knew these very, very intelligent people who were, from a professional standpoint, really struggling, right? They just had something missing, despite the fact they had this incredible intellectual horsepower. So I've had this journey for over 2 decades now. And revenue EQ is the term we coined here to talk about this concept of leveraging the emotional competencies, which are measured by a quotient, like a numerical score, as applied to the revenue function. And so an example, I always find it's too fluffy stuffy. So I want to give you a very tactical example of how I think it works. If I take the Nearbound the blueprints and go out and see what are effectively plays, let's think about it from a sports analogy. We have the playbook. We send our players onto the field. They've been playing lacrosse. And now we go, no, new game. Here is the American football playbook. Go run these plays. Can they do it? Well, they physically look different, don't they? The linebacker doesn't look like your typical lacrosse player. And so they just they've got to build these muscles to even be able to execute the plays they're being asked to do. Perhaps they go through the motions of the play and they get annihilated. Now, coming back to revenue EQ, you can see exactly how that lines up. I take Jared's playbook. I know that I need to speak to a partner about 5 of their accounts, share 5 of my accounts, do some co-selling on 5 accounts. I get it. The 3x5 makes total sense. But guess what? My sense of self-regard and the value that I personally bring to this conversation is not strong today. I'm reaching out to you, Isaac, a man with many, many more years experience than me. And so I'm anxious. And so I come to you uncertain, anxious, lacking in confidence and say, I would like you to trust me with some of your top accounts. How about it, Isaac? I can't run the play. I know the play. It's my emotional intelligence, which has 15 dimensions. When we talk EQ, EI, everyone thinks about interpersonal skills, right? Jared, very, very high emotional intelligence. Whenever I spend time with him, I feel great. He's empathetic. He understands me. He speaks my language. Sure. Fantastic. That's one dimension of the whole picture. And I gave you another one, which is a sense of self-regard. So what I'm seeing is, with all the fabulous technology we have now, the deep insight we have in terms of the plays that need to be run, the one thing that people aren't thinking about, and possibly a core reason they're failing, I think, is because the competencies of the individuals don't match the demands of the game now. Right? So many folks listening to this podcast think about mindset, mindfulness, all that good stuff. We've been talking about that for years. Good stuff, very, very important. And this stuff kind of connects that principle where we need to train the mind so that we can execute the plays. That's how I'm thinking of it.
What
I can tell you how, but that's my first response.
what a fantastic setup by you both. I was listening intently because um, so many things just came together almost serendipitously there. Matt used a word mindset. Ironically, just 2 weeks ago, I gave a presentation at Catalyst, so the partnership leaders big conference, kicking off the third day, opening up the conference, and I led with something different. I didn't lead with sales plays. I didn't lead with marketing plays. I didn't lead with partner plays. I led with this presentation called the Nearbound Mindset. And I think I was missing half of the equation, though, to what you were just talking about. My Nearbound Mindset conversation was really a clarion call for partner leaders to be the person who's most helpful to the sales organization, to the marketing organization, to the success organization, right? To bring those principles and that ethos into each department and help those leaders in those teams, right? Run Nearbound plays in those departments versus you trying to build your own GTM inside of a partnerships department, right? Because that's often what happens, especially in SaaS, is we'll hear things in the market, Matt, like, give first. And generally we tend to agree with like that type of, ethos. But what I think is the missing key in this entire conversation is this, I don't know how to phrase it other than maybe customer centricity. And I think Jill Rowley and Sam McKenna had said this a lot, which is like, show me, you know me. And what I think is underpinning this change is that as sellers, you can't just be someone that is willing to partner and have the playbook. I think that you need to understand the customer deeper than you ever had to have before in sales. So for instance, like Matt, I just did this. So like this is real time, kind of like learning out loud, putting all these pieces together. We're talking about how people buy is their nodes of trust, right? The people that are around them. And that the plays for go to market need to shift in order to reach them through those channels, right? Those people. And then in order to work with those people, what do you need to have? You need to have something. So for instance, Matt, you phrased, asking for help on accounts in the context of like, hey, I'm nervous. I'm a little bit less, let's say educated on this topic or, this customer subset. Can you get me into these accounts? That's a really poor ask. It doesn't show that person that you know them, right? You're lacking lots of context. You have to make it very easy for people to help you, right? So the more of an expert you are in an industry, the easier it is to have that empathy and that EQ. So I think the pulling all of those things together is there is this shift from how we buy. The playbook is changing. And as a person, you need to change how you think about working with other people, right? Building that value kind of not just one way, but three-way: yourself, the end customer, and the partner.
Yeah, and it starts
And
with
that's a
you.
different type of skill set, if you will, skills versus, plays.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it starts with you, right? At the end of the day, I've got to know what value that I'm bringing out into the world, not only with the prospective customer, but to the person that I'm looking to partner with, and truly believe that I'm a peer at least with this person, so I can confidently step into the conversation. And one thing I sort of like to talk to folks about, it's basically like asking somebody for a persistent LinkedIn referral/recommendation. Like, would Isaac be happy for everyone in the world to see that he thinks Matt Cameron is the right guy to solve this problem? Because in doing so, that's a position for him in the market. And if they all think I'm an idiot, then he's tarred with the same thing, right? So it's really important, and I think that this is where there needs to be a bunch of mindset work done with folks and sit down and where does it happen? It happens with enablement. It happens with frontline management, where they're sitting with their folks and saying, okay, let's do a reality test here. Talk to me about why you've earned the right to have this conversation. What is the value for them? What are the objections going to look like, and why are they invalid? These sorts of things. So that when I get to it, I'm very confident. I'm highly empathetic because I'm speaking to what's valuable to that partner and that customer, not just me. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm here to offer some value to everybody. These sorts of things. And the other thing I will say is that what I've seen a lot in the channel ecosystem, the partner ecosystems, people can be a little bit assumptive. If you're for example, if you're working with another company, Jared, I'll go in there and think, oh, I've seen they've signed them in a customer, therefore, these things must be true, and then I can dive in. But they're not testing reality. Maybe that customer always have a 6-month lumpy onboarding period. So first 6 months, terrible time to be asking for introductions or whatever else. They don't see value for 9 months. When that 9 months is done, that's a great time to engage. I'm being simplistic to illustrate a point.
Right. I think it's very valid though, because if you think about what's been missing from sales, it's an interesting question to unpack further. So Matt, to get even more specific and tactical, here's something that I've just did as recently as last week. So I just hired a new rep, and the expectations that I set for this rep were different than any rep I have ever hired in a past life. Something's changed. Like how I sold this person on joining this company and what I told them their job is different than the dozens of sellers that I've hired in the past. And I might be crazy and I might be wrong on this. I'd actually like your take. So here's what I told them. I told her, this rep that starts next week, I said, look, the thing that I know you can sell. She was a former news reporter, right? So like on TV, like just a giant personality, can clearly talk to people and get the best out of them too. So like really good sales stuff. But I said, the thing that you're going to need is you're going to need to become an expert on the customer. And what no CRO that you're talking to right now will probably say to you today, but I truly believe is that you need to not only pick me, you need to not only pick my company, but you need to pick this industry and you need to pick this customer. What does that mean? That if you hop from your current industry into this industry and then into another one, over time, you're restarting at zero. In my opinion, if you want to be very successful at sales, you need to become an expert at your industry, right? Be the most helpful person possible to those customers. And here's what I'm going to tell you right now. You're going to help personally onboard one customer per quarter. How do I know you can do it? Because I'm doing it, right? I wrote the Nearbound Sales Blueprint, not someone on Isaac's team. I mean, certainly shout out Shawnee and the team for helping, but like I didn't ask them to write the content and come the other way. It was the other way around, right? Based on doing, right? So if trust only comes from helping people reach their promised land, then I think that part of this revenue EQ, this Nearbound mindset, and this empathy needs to be the following, is that sellers need to have case studies of themselves, right? So a track record of not just how my company has helped X, Y, or Z customers. Here's how I have helped X, Y, or Z customers. When you can speak to that context as a person, I don't know, there's something that's almost even more atomic about this, that you have more opportunity than it is, oh, now I'm swallowed in the sea of partnering. It's actually, you become very important if you're really good at that. So I'd love your take on that. Did I just set that seller up for a terrible, path in life here? Or did I perhaps tap into something that's interesting to you?
No, you have, and everything requires context. So I think you've set them up perfectly for your context, which is essentially a consultative sale in a left-hand side of the curve, the bell curve, in terms of early adoption and visionary people who are changing the way they're doing business. Right? No one yet can say I've got the gold medal in how this works. Like no one can claim victory, and you're at the leading edge of this, and therefore it is a consultative sell. They're not buying a solution to a known problem, right? They're buying a platform that needs to be adopted in a way that's fit for purpose and their specific context. So I like the way you broke it all the way down to customer, and the suggestion that she onboards customers. Perfect. I want to come
At least right along, right? So like one account
yeah.
per quarter is like, you have to see that end to end, so that way you could speak to what's going on.
Exactly, and gives them tangible storytelling. And I'm assuming that she and others are going to be learning all the other stories from CSMs and stuff like that to put in their back pocket. To your point, nothing like saying, I worked with this company, you can call them. Now, let me just pause for a second, and sort of some of your listeners are going to be working for horizontally applied solution sets that are transactional in nature, that don't require any deep consulting expertise. Like it's a known problem. We're in a mature market. We've been selling these things for 20 years. I would argue that what you just said isn't required in those markets for a simple sale. There's a lot of, let's not get on that, but I just want to just cut that off so people don't, hang on, in my situation doesn't work. Let's be specific. In a consultative sell, that's exactly what happens. And I can give you any number of examples of the best salespeople I've ever worked who, to your point, have picked a lane. If I'm going to sell CRM in financial services, I better know exactly what the job of an institutional investment banker is day to day, have sat next to them, looked at their screens, understood the workflows, and helped them solve problems by saying, have you thought about it this way? Right. And this is where you're at. This is what your company's about. So I think you've hit it on the
to,
mark.
to put this together, and I'll kick it to you, Isaac. I think the main takeaway here from that segment is we used to really obsess with how to run, let's say, our job, our department, our function, and really focus on the playbook, the operating model, right? The tactics, the process, the ops, if you will, of that function, sales, marketing, CS, product. And at the end of the day, I think the inverse is going to become more true than ever, where those things will get automated to a, let's say, diminishing returns, right? And they, to some degree, are. I mean, maybe it's a solved problem, quote unquote, like it's just a matter of like that last 10%, right? But what's more valuable now than ever is the understanding of that customer, right? Like that is something that generative content isn't able to pick up, right? The earned secret, as Paul Graham talked about it, is, if you're starting a business, the best entrepreneurs are ones that have an earned secret. So why throw that earned secret away about the market, the customer? Like I see sellers doing that all the time, and I'm like, you're really screwing up. You're starting over at zero. Look at Jill Rowley, best sales SaaS person in the world that I know. And she hovered around the same ecosystems for 20 years.
All right. I'm going to rain on the parade. Or at least just play devil's
Do
advocate. And Matt, you may have at least partially answered this when you talked about recognizing where you are in the adoption curve with your product, your industry, and this may, what you're talking about, Jared, might be much more for when you're in the early phases, when you're haven't crossed the chasm yet, things aren't really well known, problemized. But regardless, let's play devil's advocate. Because what I'm hearing is like, okay, great. All the old tactics, they don't work as well. You got to implement a Nearbound strategy. And I'm thinking, let's say you're a partner manager and you're listening to this and you're like, okay, cool. I'm all hyped up. I'm going to make the case for Nearbound. I'm going to go to all the other departments. I'm going to go to my leadership and be like, okay, guys, here's all the plays we need to run. And oh, by the way, every single person on the team needs to become a different person and be totally, have new skills, new attributes. They have to think different. They have to have been the customer or become who the customer is. And you're like, well, hold on. We've got this nicely, specialized team where people fit in these things and they're good at the one thing that they do. And that's good enough. Like, how realistic is it to come and say, okay, not only do we have to change all of our strategies and plays, every person on the team has to be a different person. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, does that just seem like too much of a, like asking sellers to do something that's just not who they are? That's why they're in sales, because they have certain skill sets and personalities. Now you're asking them to be different.
Actually, I think these are complementary competencies to what the base level prototype of a enterprise and consultative seller is today, frankly. So I think I'll take your objections well, actually, Isaac. I think point well made. If that were true, I don't think it's true. I think, yes, they have to adapt to new plays, but guess what? It's just like joining a new company and getting a new sales methodology and process. People do it every few years in their career. I have zero concerns about that. They can do that. The question is, though, back to our original point about revenue EQ, can they execute on these new plays? And I don't think they need to become a new person, but if I look at your 15 different EQ competence, there'll be some that you've got very, very strong competency in, right? And there'll be others, though, that are weaker. Now, the very, very best enterprise salespeople today, I used to break them into three groups. I'd say there's the engineer, who's a person who's got low EQ, but a very, very, and many competencies, but very, very process oriented, but great for transactional sales. Doesn't matter. Follow the playbook. You're gonna be fine. There's the designer type person, never follows a damn playbook, but gee, they've got high empathy, high self regard, high assertiveness. They just get stuff done, but they're entirely unpredictable. They're the ones that can probably survive in this ecosystem. But if you really want someone who's amazing, the architect is the combination of the two. They take Jared's plays, they execute them faithfully, and they have their other competencies. So I think the opportunity here, and possibly for me and others who think about this, is working with revenue leaders to figure out, okay, let's do an assessment of where our people are at. Who is going to struggle executing on these plays based on their emotional intelligence competency deficits? And then how do we develop those? How do we do the exercises, the role plays, the mentoring, the coaching, the let me show you how it's done stuff, so that they can build those muscles? Because they're not going to fall over flat. They'll just be 30% as good as they could be if they just had these other competencies. Because Jared, maybe you've seen this, people trying to execute on your playbook and they're just so clumsy. And in this, I'll go back to the simple example in their engagement with a partner to say, hey, get me in your accounts. And there's just no mutual exchange of value. There's no impact.
Yeah. I mean,
stuff.
it's, you've said that multiple times is like, hey, get me into your accounts. And like, even in reference to the blueprint, people will still have that sentiment, even though like I'm 3/4 of the way through the blueprint before I even introduce the intro play, right? It's like, Intel influence. And that's because people default to that, hey, so you're going to do something for me, right? Like there's just that mindset that's so backwards and wrong. And I hate to call it entitled, because it's not that they're necessarily entitled, but it certainly can feel that way as a head of partnerships trying to work with a new AE or a head of sales, that you're not on the same page. And I think I'll take issue to what Isaac said and actually disagree.
Fight me, Jared. Let's go.
Kind of on the point. Yeah, because I think it's wrong. And I think the thing that ties these things together, from the shift in the market and how we buy, the plays that recognize that, and let's call it the mindset or the EQ, is that the clarity on call for partner leaders today should be customer centricity and surrounding those customers with those that they already trust to consume their information, marketing, right? Where they buy vendors, IT solutions, SaaS, how they're successful service providers, agencies, consultants. What I just did is showed you that like the customer has the answer to these questions. And the more that you understand them and who they work with and who they trust and who influence them, who they buy from, who helps them, the more that you are going to be effective at driving this change across your marketing team, your sales team, your success team, et cetera. I think that's so important that be one of the biggest things that you can take up as a partner leader. If you can step in the room and it's clear that you are the one that has the customer at the center more than anyone else, you are going to have the respect of that room.
Yeah, Jared, I think that's a great response. And as Matt was talking, and even earlier, Matt, when you used the sports analogy, I love that, because when you realize
that was actually really good analogy. I like that one too.
Something's not working, and you realize you need to make a change. You can go the really, really risky route and be like, we literally have to throw out everything and start from scratch. And if you follow sports, you see franchises do this, the rebuilding franchises. How often does it work? Not very often. I'm a fan of many franchises, mostly based in Detroit, who have tried rebuilding many, many, many times. And it's a really risky play. Occasionally it pays off. But what's better is if you can say, okay, we have some things working, but something is not working. We're hitting a ceiling. Can we change, but not change everything? And you've seen this work where you bring in a new coach or a new offensive coordinator and you're like, we're going to take the existing pieces we have, and they're valuable, but they're being pointed in the wrong place. And we need to lean into the things that are strong. And when you were talking, Matt, about the different personality types, and Jared, you talking about listening to the buyer, I'm thinking about how some buyers love to get on a call with that engineer type. They don't want to get on a call. They don't care about somebody who's got like the really smooth social skills. Other buyers need somebody who can talk to them like a person and not get really into the weeds technically. And so like, maybe you've got the pieces already on your team. Yeah, maybe you bring in a couple new players here and there, and you got a couple people that don't fit, but it's more about, if we recognize this new approach, this new mindset of surrounding our buyers, now let's just zoom out and take stock of who do we have on the roster? What are the assets that we have to work with? What do we already know how to do? And maybe it's more about reorienting to align to what buyers want, given the existing pieces, than it is saying we need everybody to become a new version of themselves.
Do you know who we haven't talked about that is critical in this? Everything we've discussed earlier, and particularly the stuff you went on, Jared, around understanding, where they buy, who they trust, what they do, blah, blah, blah. Marketing. The CMO, this is their job. When I'm thinking about...
It was supposed to be, Matt. So what's the root word of marketing? It's market, right? The market is always first. And then somehow during since I've known you, it's been marketing. It's been all about the ING. It hasn't been about
though. He was going. He was on.
I know. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So my point is that if they're going to allocate resources to, creating demand, creating awareness, whatever the KPI is this quarter, they have to know the answers to all these things. Because if I'm going to spend $200,000 on a concrete convention in Las Vegas, I better know that the personas we sell to are going to attend that conference, right? And all the stuff you said earlier, which I don't need to repeat, that's marketing. And so as we're thinking about this stuff, I worry a little bit that some organizations are trying to do it in the traditional quote sales organization because we're responsible for this in our go-to-market strategy. Larger, more mature organizations, I'm sure, won't make that mistake because it's a CMO CRO type partnership, or even in some organizations, I see the CRO has the VP marketing reporting to them. But I think they're critical, and they should have done a lot of the groundwork already to get you started.
So we got
I
the
think we could.
sales guru here talking about marketing. Hey, I love it.
Well, we see some of this too. I mean, look at Allison Monroe at Vena, right? So Chief Market and Ecosystem Officer, right? It's like I love that title. Like clearly, really aligned to what you just said, Matt. And then, ironically, the CEO of Vena, if I'm not mistaken, I believe is Hunter, who was the ex CRO at HubSpot. Right. So you can kind of see how like companies that have kind of seen the story, the people around them, they're oriented kind of this way. And it goes all the way back to Isaac Sunir Shah. That what did he say? The, kind of the OG, partner guy, SaaS Connect and all that. He's always felt it's most closely aligned with marketing as well.
At the end of the day, people talk about it as being a channel, right? And I mean it in the old school version of it. There's the
Right.
direct sales channel, the indirect channel, there's so forth and so on. So it makes sense to me that's true. So where does this leave us, and why is Nearbound so important right now? I'll say again what I said at the start. I've been predicting the failure in terms of CAC, or customer acquisition cost, of the traditional channels for years. I was way ahead of it, which is not a positive thing. I see these things too early. It means that I'm moving in a direction that where the market hasn't moved yet, too early, right? But we're here now. We're here, and people listening need to be paying attention. As I said earlier, this is a very positive thing for folks who are paying attention at the stage and engaging with thought leaders like yourselves, because you're shaping what is to become and what is becoming. And folks who ignore this in the next 2 or 3 years, they're the ones where I'm going to see, executive replacements happening, because the results are just not going to be there. What are you putting on the screen for us, Isaac?
This is Jared. Jared, before you walk through this, I just have to comment, Matt, on that. Like, huge kudos to you for being so early, but then continuing to stick with it, because I truly believe being too early is worse than being too. When you're too late, there's still some value to catch on the tail end of a trend. And like, maybe you weren't right out front getting the disproportionate returns, but it'll last for a while. When you're too early, everything is so hard. You're pushing a boulder up a hill over and over and over and over again. And then you're like, I missed it. And then a year or two later, someone else succeeds and you have to suffer. So the fact that you stuck with it and you've been here and you didn't give up, and now you're starting to see these changes that you predicted, well done.
Thank you.
I couldn't say that more. And in fact, for partner folks, you've had and trained a lot of partner hacker readers, and my friends Matt and the team with some of the courses that you put together through SaaSy, and the channel and partner programs with like Lisa and some of the other things that we've been doing. So like, yeah, Matt's been calling this for I think quite some time. And one thing I wanted to pull up here for you both to just opine on real quick. So if you're just listening in, I've just pulled up a screenshot of something at a report that I saw from SMP Capital IQ. So one of their BI tools is that this is public market SaaS valuations since 2015. And there's a pretty consistent trend, minus the COVID blip, like kind of where we're at. And so, Matt, I was just kind of pulling this up to be like, hey, you've been seeing this for a while. This certainly looks like a trend if you're looking at the past 8 years. Does it, from your vantage point, what does this say to you in terms of CAC, LTV, growth rates, et cetera?
Well, I don't know I can comment on the CAC, but of course I would imagine that it correlates, right? For sure, and in terms of the growth rates. I just know, and it'd be really fascinating to get the figures. I know people are publishing at the moment the increasing customer acquisition costs we're seeing through traditional channels. We've always talked about the ecosystem approach, traditionally called channel and partners, as being a low acquisition cost modality, the reality was people used to think that it was only for people who had technical partnerships or very obvious co-selling partnerships. And the way you folks are talking about, way you're thinking about it, is much more all-encompassing. And I think it needs to be the default mode setting for every organization, right? That's what I think.
So
If you,
go ahead,
that's
Matt.
what, yeah. No, I was going to say, if you believe that your organization can't take aspects of the Nearbound mindset and methodology and apply it to your business model, then I would contend that perhaps you don't have a business model that's worth pursuing in the long run. Maybe the short run, but in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jared, that graph of, for those who are listening, just showing the declining valuations in B2B SaaS companies. You could say, well, it's because the CAC to LTV ratio is getting worse. That's possible. There's another thing that may be going on there, which I think doesn't change what needs to be done, but it could be that like I bet there's companies earlier in that had even worse CAC to LTV ratios that had higher valuations at some point because it didn't matter as much then. So in a world of tons of capital where there's just capital everywhere, valuations are going to get bid up because capital is looking for places to deploy and it's really, really frothy. And so those things don't matter as much in that environment. So whether or not their CAC to LTV is trending down, trending up and hurting those valuations, or the a little bit of a squeeze on capital starting is making people suddenly care about those metrics a lot more than they did before. They want a much sooner plan to profitability for if you're, raising venture capital. Okay, when are you going to be profitable? When are you going to get those costs down than they did before? So it could just be that. And either way, it now matters more. Like those numbers matter more. You have to pay more attention and you can't just assume, hey, look, everybody in the industry, we know we can acquire a bunch of users. If we get enough users, we can get a high enough valuation. Like whether it's the cost going up or people caring about the costs, the focus on the cost increasing, either way, same answer. You got to find a way to get to people at a lower cost than just ramping up your inbound and outbound.
And the other thing I might layer on top of that, I don't disagree with what either of you said, is so I'm like neck deep, and I'm not sure that we even talked about this too much on the podcast before, Isaac, but so I'm like neck deep in writing Nearbound the book right now. And there's many case studies and stories, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of conversations, published thousands of pieces of content. So like this book has been, a long time in the making, but we're getting much closer. And one of the stories is obviously it's an orange shaded one, it's about HubSpot. And Matt, I'll share something with you that just shocked me. HubSpot has never missed an earnings report.
I read something like just the other day about that, actually. It was news to me. It was incredible.
Which is very interesting. And if you look at them, HubSpot was the 5th place player, right? You had Eloqua, you had Pardot, you had Marketo, you had Acton, all that were objectively larger than HubSpot. They were kind of relegated as the SMB player. And, the public market valuation multiple kind of going down, so to speak. I think more than anything, what investors are looking for is not, just CAC LTV ratio or growth rate, is they're looking for trustworthy companies and sustainable companies. When I say sustainable, it's that, hey, is there any major risk in this model? If you break apart HubSpot's earnings and their calls, and their quarterlies, it's such a diversified business, right? It comes like their costs are distributed. They have multiple revenue. It truly is an ecosystem, so to speak. Salesforce, obviously, you could say many of the same things about their story, obviously at a much larger scale, certainly Microsoft at all. But I think HubSpot paints a really illustrative point for us to take a look at what that means, is that you got to be a more sustainable company. And, outbound, it's a faucet, right? Inbound's a funnel. There really aren't the compound effects of being able to do something like, we're recording this during inbound week, right? HubSpot has 20,000 people descending on Boston that aren't there for HubSpot. They're there for each other.
Yeah, I think I want to pull out some words you just said, because I think people might have skipped over them. You said a compounding effect. There's no compounding in outbound. It's a linear.
Right.
But to your point, like just sit on that for a minute and think about your business. Anybody who's listening, where is the compound interest occurring? where does that happen, right? And that was the promise of SaaS, right? Which layer upon layer, customers don't go away, they don't, if they don't churn, yada yada yada. And I'll tell you a guest I would like to see on your podcast, and that's Dave Kellogg from Kellblog. Like, he's a former CMO, a CMO whisperer, and he does really great breakdowns of public company data. And I think it'd be very, very interesting to get his perspective on what's happening. One perspective I keep hearing about is finally free cash flow on the statement is becoming critical, whereas before people kind of ignored it. But now sort of the chickens have come home to roost, right? So yeah.
Matt, I got to say thank you, not just for coming on this episode, but here we are. Partner Hacker is now Nearbound.com. The PartnerUp is now the Nearbound podcast, like a year and a half later after starting this thing. And I distinctly remember when Jared and I were talking, and he's like, hey, you got to come do this Partner Hacker thing with me. One of my questions was, does Jared just think that partnerships are super important because he just worked in partnerships and he's got too much of a, inside view? And is it really that big of a deal in the broader market? And Jared's always been really, really good at learning from people and quickly finding who the best are at everything, whether they're people who have written books that he can read or he can meet personally. And he connected with me with a bunch of people. You were one of them that are like not in partnerships, but are saying the same thing about what's happening and what's changing. And so like you influencing Jared, you being one of the people that kind of validated to me this thesis for Partner Hacker. Huge thanks for that. I just get to skate into this party at the last minute and be like, oh, wow, this is great. This stuff's going crazy. And you're like, I've been saying this for 15 years and no one would listen. But thanks, Matt. And it's really exciting to have you on this episode.
Well, I'll respond by saying ideas are cheap, execution is everything. So kudos to you boys for making it happening and leading the charge. It's been a pleasure being with you both. And I'm excited to see what comes next with Nearbound.
Absolutely. Matt Cameron, everybody. Thank you so much, Matt, for the history, the lessons over the years, and for finally joining us. I know we've had many conversations, even since starting Partner Hacker, but I couldn't think of a better friend of the show, friend to Isaac and me, and really the industry at large than you. So I can't say partner up, peace out. I didn't think of the closing. I'll come up with the closing on the next one.
Yeah, submit your closing ideas to us.
Yeah, I know. I need the close. I had my opening and my close were really good.
We got to do something. Look forward
all right,
to the next one.
All right, we will see you all next time.
Come to the summit, nearboundsummit.com. Don't forget.